Before he was Buddha, the life of Siddhartha. The golden child. In the 6th century before Christ, in the foothills of the Himalaya, near the present-day border between India and Nepal, there was a small but prosperous kingdom ruled by the warrior people, Sakya. The capital city of this kingdom was Kapilavastu, and the land around was thickly dotted with small towns and villages. To the south of this kingdom lay the country of Kosala, and beyond that the kingdom of Magadha, in the area of modern India, state of Bihar around Raigad. To the east lay the land of Golia, from which came Queen Mahamaya, the wife of the Sakyan ruler, King Suddhartha. I'm going by the books, guys. Hi, Piton Freestyle. น้อยจะมาอ่าน story about พระพุทธเจ้าเนาะสู่ฟัง Okay, so let's see here. Where was I? มื้อนี้น้อยก็มาเทสนิวไมค์เนาะได้นิวไมโครโฟนเด้หันมองนี่นะหุ้ยคักขนาดเลยเสียงดีบ่มื้อนี้ เขียนเสียงดีแล้วมื้อหน้าสิร้องเพลงสู่ฟังเขียนเสียงบ่ดีแล้วก็แล้วไปใส่ไมค์ไว้อ่านสตอรี่ต่อไป Okay, so here we go. See here. ฮอดใส่ละเฮา เขียนเป็นภาษาอังกฤษได้บ่เขียนเป็นภาษาไทยนี่มันต้องได้ใช้ Google Translate หั่นนะโอเค ภาษาลาวนี่เนาะ In the year 560 BC, there was great excitement in the land of the Sakyan because Queen Mahamaya was to bear a child. Okay, sounds good. Thank you, better. According to the custom of the time, a woman expecting a baby would return to her parents' home for the birth, and in due course it was arranged for Queen Mahamaya to make the journey to the neighboring kingdom. Of her father. The king sent soldiers ahead to prepare the way, and the queen set out, carried in a decorative palanquin and attended by large companies of guards and retainers. On the way to Golia, the parties passed by a garden called Lumbini Park, where, attracted by the trees and flowers, the queen ordered a halt. It was intended to be only a rest. But while the queen was laying in the leafy and fragrant shade of the salad trees in full bloom, she went into labor. And gave birth to a son. There was no longer any reasons to continue the journey to Gwalior, and the party returned to Ka- Kapila Vastu, where the new prince where the new prince was greeted with great rejoicing. He was named Siddhartha, which means wish fulfilled, by a proud and doting father. Such, in outline, is the account given in the Pali scripture of how the man who was to become revered by millions throughout most of recorded history as the enlightened one, the perfect being, the Buddha, made his entries into the world. The date of his birth, the full moon day of the month Wesak, corresponds to May in our calendar and is very sacred. For in Buddhism tradition, it is the date not only for the Buddha's birth, but also of his enlightenment and death. And indeed, the account of this nativity, like so many else written down about the Buddha's life, especially the early years, is full of legendaries and symbolic elements. It would be impossible to disentangle the purely historical event from their fantastic and miraculous embroideries, but it would in any case be an exercise of little value. The essential features of the Buddha's life and teachings are quite clear, and all of the rest, if many incidents did not happen as reported, they might as well have done, such in their symbolic quality. Before continuing with the account of Buddha's life, something must be said about the historical circumstances. At this period, 2 or more thousand years ago, the civilization that had grown up in northern India, following the settlements there of Aryan invaders from Central Asia, was already quite complex and sophisticated. The term Hindu did not exist at that time. It was coined much later, but the chief elements of what was to become known as Hindu society were well established. The most obvious of this was the organizations of the community according to caste. The variance of caste in India is bewildering, but traditionally, they have all fallen into one of 4 groups. At the tops were Brahmins, who had the rights to act as priests and were the custodians of religious knowledge. Next, Kshatriya, or warrior, who generally provides the ruling class and were responsible for governing and protecting the community. Then Devayas, or merchants, who kept the economic life of the community going. And finally, Sudra, who did most of the hard work as artisans, laborers, and servants. The family into which Buddha was born belonged to Kshatriya clan, Gautama. But the Kshatriya formed the nobilities and governing class of society. The spiritual leadership was held by the Brahmins, hence the name Brahminism, the religious system of that time. King relied on Brahmins not only to perform religious functions, but also to give advice and guardians. So not surprisingly, priests figured predominantly in the early life of the Buddha. as the proud king Siddhartha thought about the career of his son and sought clues to his destiny. Um, Hi, Gal YouTube. How are you? Um, สบายดีเนาะมื้อนี้น้อยมา test out mic I got a brand new mic, so I'm testing it out. How's my voice sounding? Can you hear me clearly? Thai. Okay, continuing up. One of the first visitors to the king after the birth of his son was venerable sage named Gula Devara, also called Asita. Gula Devara were renowned for his wisdom and his deputed power of clairvoyance, and it was he who first suggested when he came to the palace to pay his respect to the new prince that King Suhodara's son was to be a man out of the ordinary. Thank you for liking. Siddhartha, he first smiled and then began to weep. Alarmed, Sahodara said, "Why are you weeping? Is any misfortune likely to come to the baby?" "No," replied Gula Devala. "I smile because I have been privileged to see a being who I perceive from certain perspective signs is surely destined to become a fully enlightened one, a Buddha. But when I look into my own future, I see that I shall not live to hear him deliver his teaching. That is why tears came to my eyes. Rejoice, King, for the son that is born to you will become the greatest being in the whole world." The concept of enlightenment was well known among religious devotees of the time, and as the career of the Buddha showed, many strove about it by ways of the hermit, eccentric, or the monk's discipline. The term Buddha itself means wise one, was not uncommonly applied to holy men of acknowledged spiritual status, but the ideas of the royal prince abandoning his heritage in favor of a life austerity was not so easily accepted, especially amongst members of his family who would have other ambitions for him. Sahodana therefore began to worry. The method of foretelling by which Gwala Diwala had arrived at his prediction was to read a person's body for certain marks or characteristics indicating the future course of his life. A kind of whole body palmistry. In order to test Gwala Devala's interpretations, the king summoned 8 of the most learned Brahmins in the land to hear, who were also adapted in body reading. 7 of the Brahmins, also studying the child, conclude that there were 2 possible courses open to him. If he decided to remain in the world, he would become a great emperor. If, on the other hand, he decided to give up the world and seek enlightenment, he would become a Buddha. But the 8 Brahmin Kondana was e- what unequivocal. His marking shows that his futures will come when he will witness four special signs, and as a result, he will renounce the world and go out to seek enlightenment. Finally, he will achieve that enlightenment and become a Buddha. So impressed by Kundana, by what he had read in the child's appearance, that his parents decided then and there to renounce the world, and accompanied by four friends of like mind, went away to wait for Siddhartha to grow up and attain Buddhahood. Kondana and his group later feature predominantly in the Buddha's career. King Suddhartha was greatly upset by this prediction, and it was too obsessed, and it was too seeing him as his son grows up. But meanwhile, the child was too focused on everyone's admiration. His skin, it is said, have a golden hint and gleam with a metallic gold glow. His eyes was blue like the flowers of the flax plant. His hair was black with a bluish tint, and his limb was perfectly molded. On the 7th day after his birth, Siddhartha's mother, Queen Mahamaya, died. He was not deprived of motherly care, however, for the queen's sister, Pajapati, took responsibility for him. Polygamy was common among the nobility in that society, and Pajapati was also married to Suddhartha. According to the text, she herself gave birth to a child on that day that Mahamaya died, but she put out her own son to be looked after by a nurse, and brought up Siddhartha as her own, with all the love of a real mother. After a few years, Siddhartha went to school, where he joined the children of other noble families. His ability quickly impressed his teacher, and he rapidly learned a wide range of subjects, including languages and mathematics. He also became proficient in sports like wrestling and archery. He excelled in all things, surpassing his fellow pupil, and even going beyond what his teacher could teach him. He was tall, strong, and handsome, and his good nature and kindness endeared him to everyone. I can see why he's so well loved. Every year in the land of the second, a plowing festival was held. It seems to have been a largely ceremonial affair, suggesting a fertility ritual. The king himself drove the first pair of bullocks, which wore golden trapping in their horn, and pulled a golden plow. Other nobles of the kingdom drove bullocks wearing silver harnessing and drawing silver plows. When Siddhartha was 7, the king took him on the plowing festival. During the proceeding, the boy was taken by his attendant to rest under a rose apple tree on the specially prepared couch. While seated there, he forgot all about the plowing festival and fell into meditation, breathing in the measures and the controlled way of practice of skilled practitioner until he entered a trance. It was the first mystical experience recorded in his life. It was in this way that his attendant found him when they came back a little later, aloof from his surrounding in a state of rapture. Time had stood still for him, and as if to make this point, the account says that the shadow of the rose apple tree under which he was sitting did not move from the time the attendant had left up to their return. This event was reported to the king, who came hurriedly to witness this latest evidence of his son's uniqueness. Such is made in the account of Siddhartha's earlier year of his compassion of living things. One day he was walking in the wood with his cousin Devadatta, who later was the Buddhist community, whom later, when the Buddhist community had become established, was to take the role of a troublemaker. Devadatta was carrying a bow and arrow with him. I think this is Patewatat. Yeah, this is what it is. Devadatta. That's what the book says, but I'm saying Tewatat, okay? Was carrying a bow and arrow with him, and seeing a swan pass by overhead, he took aim and shot it. Both boys ran quickly to where the birds had fallen, and Siddhartha arrived first. The swan was still alive, so Siddhartha gently drew the arrow out of his wing, and then took some leaf and squeezed the juice from them onto the wound to stop the bleeding and try to calm the frightened bird. When Tewatat arrived and wanted to claim the swan, Siddhartha refused. If you had killed it, it would have been yours, he said, but it was only wounded, and since it is I who has saved its life, it belongs to me. The argument went on until Siddhartha suggested putting the case before the court of wise men. After hearing all the evidence, their verdicts were, a life must belong to the one who tried to save it. A life cannot be claimed by one who is only trying to destroy it. Siddhartha had the right to take the wounded swan. Meanwhile, King Suddhodana continued to ponder the prophecy made by the Brahmins at his son's birth, and as the boys grew up, his worry particularly about Kundana's prediction that Siddhartha would renounce the world after seeing 4 special signs. So one day, he sent again for his Brahmins, only 7 this time, since Kundana had disappeared to await the transformation of Siddhartha into a Buddha, and asked them to explain what was meant by the 4 signs. Unlike Kundana, the 7 Burmese only allowed 2 possible courses for Siddhartha's life. He would become either a Buddha or a great emperor. He would opt for a formal if he was to be confronted in turn by 4 men of different conditions. 1. An old man. 2. A sick man. 3. A dead man. 4. Finally, an eccentric. One who had announced the world to seek deliverance from suffering. Well, thought the king, I must ensure that my son did not see any such signs. Immediately he ordered that any old or sick people and no sign of death should be permitted near the prince. Guards were specially posted to enforce this. No eccentric was allowed within a mile of him. He was given young servants, and any mention of illness, old age, death, or monasticism was strictly forbidden. Even fading flowers and leaves was removed from gardens and, and pleasure perks so that Prince should not see anything that might suggest decay and death. At the same time, all possible luxuries and the like were provided for Siddhartha. 3 palaces were built for him, one for each season of the year in that tropical region: the hot season, the rain, and the cool months of winter. Extensive parks and hunting grounds, decorated with ponds full of fishes, water lilies, and swan, were prepared. In this environment, Siddhartha developed into a young man of great strength and beauty, and also of outstanding intellectual abilities. He outstripped all his contemporaries in the martial arts, while in knowledge and agilities of minds he surpassed even the most renowned pundits. In due course, King Saddhatissa decided the time has come for him to marry, and one day he summoned all the eligible girls in the kingdom to the palace for Siddhartha to make his choice. Among them was his cousin Yusahara, a beautiful and charming girl. Siddhartha's choice fell on her, to the king's great pleasure, and they were married with much ceremonies and rejoicing. By the time that Siddhartha was nearing his 29th birthday, Yahodhara was expecting a baby, a king, and King Suhardana had begun to think that everything was, after all, turning out as he wishes. But thought denying evidence of human conditions, he provided with every possible comfort and diversion. Siddhartha remained thoughtful and preoccupied with the inevitability of a fairy tale plot. The elaborate defense erected by the king were soon to be eroded by reality, by the discovery which was to become the basis of the Buddha's teaching that life is suffering. The human condition. All the diversion provided by the king did not prevent the prince from feeling bored and restless, and one day he summoned his chariot and personal attendant, Sena, to take him to drive in the countryside. Sena chose 4 or 5 horse of the frame, cine-breathed, white and spotless like lotus blooms, and harnessed them to the magnificent chariot. Siddhartha took the rein, majestic and resplendent as a god. They had not gone far before he saw standing in the roadway a hunched-up, tired-looking old man. At last, the precautions taken by the king had failed. Siddhartha was astonished. "What is that?" he asked Sena, bringing the horse to a stop. "It looks like a man, but his hair is all white. He has no teeth. His cheeks are sunken. His skin is dry and wrinkled, and his eyes are blurry. Look at his bent back. his rib protruding, his thin crooked arms and legs that seem as if they can hardly support his wretched frame, so that he has to lean on a stick. What kind of man is that? That, replied Sena, apparently making little efforts to sustain the elaborate structures of pretense that he had shielded Siddhartha from reality up till then, is an old man. It is someone who had been living for a long time, perhaps 60, 70, or even 80 or more years, so that his body is worn out and is decaying. It is nothing to be dismayed at. Seems it is a common thing. We all get old. Do you mean to say that all of us become like that? That we all get old? Said Siddhartha. That Yosahar and you and all my useful companion and even I myself must one day look like this? Yes, my lord, answered Sena. It is everyone's lot. Siddhartha was so upset he could not go on with his stride. Instead, he turned the horse around and went back to the palace, deep in thought, too troubled to speak. When the king saw his sons returning so soon after setting out, he asked Sena the reason, and when he heard it, he cried out in despair, "Now you have destroyed me." But the king was not one to give up so easily. In an effort to remove from Siddhartha's mind the memories of his meeting with the old man, he ordered special dramas and amusement to be provided. He also doubled the guards around the palace ground and reminded everyone of the strict instructions he had issued. But once again, Siddhartha decided to go on a chariot ride with Sena, and on this occasion, he encountered the man who was ill. He was so weak he could not stand up, but rolled and writhed on the ground. His eyes were bloodshot, his mouth was forcing, and he groaned and beat his breast in agony. As before, Sena explained the phenomenon, and once more Siddhartha was overcome with anxiety. Is this a rare thing, or does it happen to everyone? He asked. Everybody is liable to get sick, my lord, to get ill, my lord, replied Sena. Then added by ways of reassurance. But if a man is careful about his diet, keep clean, and take plenty of exercise, he is likely to remain healthy. There is no need to worry. No need to worry, exclaimed the prince. First, I see the horrors of decay and old age, and now it seems everybody is liable to find himself in such a wretched plight as this man. As before, they cut short their excursion, and Siddhartha returned home with a heavy heart. A third time, Siddhartha and Sena set out, and this time came upon a funeral procession. The mourners were wailing and beating their breasts, while in contrast, the corpse they were carrying lay still and lifeless like a statue. Sena replied to Siddhartha's predictable question and then went on, "Death, my lord, is the end of life. When life ceases, there is death. Your body dies when it can go on no longer because of old age and decay, or else it dies because of disease. Breathing stops and the heart ceases to beat. But there is nothing strange about it. It is as common as birth, for everyone who lives must sooner or later die. There is nothing you can do about it, since it is in the nature of things. So there is no point in worrying about it. Just hope for a long life." Siddhartha pondered this, and also the two earlier phenomena. He came to realize that these unpleasant facts that he had been hidden from him for so long, thanks to the misguided concern of his father, represented the true nature of existence. Life was suffering, and then he began to wonder where there was not some way out of this dilemma, some means of escape. Must everyone I love and myself too simply endure helplessness, this tyranny of old age, disease, and death? He asked himself as they once drove back to the palace. Siddhartha and Sena went on a fourth and last time. And as before, an accustomed sight awaits Siddhartha on the roadside. But this time, it was not a scene of despair. It was a man with shaven head, wearing an orange-colored robe that glows with the melon light of the morning sun, standing barefoot and holding a bowl in his hand. His face bore a calm, thoughtful expression, and his gaze was direct downward, as if he was a person at peace, engrossed in present thought. Halting his horse, Siddhartha asked Sena, "Who is this? Is this a man, or is it indeed a god who stands there so calm and aloof, as if the sorrow and peace of this world do not touch him?" "That, my lord," replied the dutiful Sena, "is an ascetic. It is a man who has sought how old age, disease, and death afflict all beings, and has renounced the world to seek a solution to the enigma of life. He has no home, but shelters in caves and woods, begging enough food for one frugal meal a day, and living a life of discipline and simplicity, striving to be pure in deed, words, and thoughts, and seeking deliverance from the world's suffering through meditation. He travels from place to place and tries to tell people how to live a good life and find happiness." This was, of course, the fourth symbolic vision foretold by the Brahmins. Greatly impressed, Siddhartha did not turn back this time, but instead drove on, deep in thought, until he reached the amusement park where he had been the destination of all his excursions with Sena. In the park, everything that has been prepared for the prince's entertainment, with musicians, dancers, poets, scholars, all waiting to attend him, and plenty of foods and drinks. But Siddhartha would not be distracted from his train of thoughts as he walked through the park so richly provided with possibilities of indulgence. His diversions, his divisions of thoughts to himself. I must become like that ascetic. I, too, shall renounce the world this very day and seek that deliverance from suffering of which I have been unaware of through all the years I have spent in superficial amusement. Eventually, tired of walking, he sat down in the shade of a tree. While he was resting, the messengers galloped on, and a foaming steed with an announcement that should have delighted the young prince. His wife, Prince Yusahara, has just given birth to a son. But far from feeling joy, Siddhartha greeted the news with dismay. Another bond to tie me, he exclaimed, as he arose to return to the palace. But his resolve remained unshaken. Nothing, not even the arrival of a son and heir, would now deflect him from the path he has chosen. The king sensed the discontent in Siddhartha, and with the Brahmin's dread philosophy now fulfilled, privately resigned himself to losing his son. Nevertheless, in a last desperate attempt to hold him, he arranged a grand feast, a celebration to mark the new birth. The leading singers and musicians in the land were invited to perform. The best and most beautiful dancers were summoned. The most sumptuous foods were served. Delicious foods were served. In deference to his fathers, Siddhartha attended the feast, but preoccupied with his own thoughts, he took no interest in the lavish entertainment that had been laid out for his benefit. And so the evening wore on, he began to doze off. In due course, seeing that they were performing for a sleeping prince, the musicians and dancers decided to have a rest as well. And soon they were too fast asleep. When Siddhartha woke up, he was surprised to see all the people who had earlier been entertaining him laying around deep in slumber. And how changed they look. Dancers and singers renowned throughout the land for their grace and beauty, now scrawl inelegantly on the chairs and couch where they had laid down. Some were snoring loudly, and others grinding their teeth like animals. The glamour of a short while before had turned to squalors. Siddhartha's disgust with the worldly life was complete, and arriving quietly, so not to disturb any of the sleeping body, he called to his attendant Sena and told him to saddle his favorite horse Kantaka, in readiness for a long journey. Before leaving, he had one duty to perform. He had still not set eyes on the son whom arrival had coincided with his decision to renounce the world. So on his way out, he paused at the room where the child and mother were sleeping. Yasohara was holding the baby close to her, her hand covering the baby's face protectively. For a moment, Siddhartha wrestled with an agonizing dilemma. If he moved his wife's hand to look at the child's face, she might wake up and prevent him from leaving. But unless he did, he would have to leave without seeing his son. He quickly made up his mind. I must go without seeing my son's face, he said to himself. But when I have found what I am now going out to seek, I shall come back, and then I shall see him and his mother. It was midnight as Siddhartha, accompanied by his faithful Sena, rode quietly out of Kapilavatthu. Only when he had gone beyond the city gate did he pause to look back at the palace, now sleeping in the moonlight, where he had spent all his life and where he was living behind everyone he knew and loved. Riding through the night, they came to a river, Anoma, which marked the border between the Sakyan kingdom and the kingdom of Magadha. Once on the other side of the river, Siddhartha dismounted. He then took off his fine silken clothes, handed them to Sena, and told him to return with them and his horse to Kapilavatthu. Such garment was not appropriate for an ascetic. Then he took out his sword and cut off his long hair. Finally, he put on some orange-colored robe provided, according to legend, by a helpful deity, took up a begging bowl, and dismissed Sena. Sena was loth to go. How can I go on living in the palace without you? He said. Let me follow you. No, replied Siddhartha. Take my clothes and my jewelry back to my father and tell him and my mother and my wife that they must not worry. I am going away to seek an escape from the misery of aging, sickness, and death. As soon as I found it, I will return to the palace and teach it to my father, my mother, my wife, my son, and everyone else. Then everyone will be truly happy. But it was Siddhartha's horse, Kantaka, that figured in the poignant last moment of this parting, according to the story. When Sena eventually agreed to return, Kantaka refused to move. It was necessary for Siddhartha to talk to the animal before it could be persuaded to leave. But it had gone only a short distance when it stopped and looked around once more at its master. It required further persuasion from Sena to make it continue. And when it finally disparted, tears was rolling from his eye. Later, it is said, the horse died of a broken heart. Discovery. With all his worldly tie cut and turning his back on the river Anoma, which now symbolically separated him from his past life, Siddhartha began the existence of a wandering eccentric. Some people were then, as ever since, common enough in India, as Siddhartha followed the usual practice of begging for his food and finding shelter wherever he could. People referred to him as a holy man or ascetic, or when they knew him well enough by his family name Gautama, but no one suspected who he really was. His identity first became known when he found himself in the city of Rajagaha, the capital of Magadha, and the site of the modern town of Rangil in the India state of Bihar. Eventually, his distinguished bearing caught the attention of the townspeople, for some of them remarked about it to the rulers of Magadha, King Bimbisara. This young man, this ascetic Gautama, as some people called him, is so charming and polite and well-groomed, they said, that he does not seem at all like a mendicant. On hearing the name Gautama, the king realized that it was the son of his friend and neighbor king Suhodana, for the news of the prince's dramatic act of renunciation must have traveled fast. Immediately the king went out himself to look for Siddhartha, and as soon as he found him, addressed him in the forthright manner. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Why are you going about in this manner? Have you quarreled with your father?" He then implored Siddhartha to give up his ascetic life and even offer him half the kingdom if he would agree to do so and settle down in Magadha. But Siddhartha graciously declined, and explaining his mission and his determination to go on searching for a happiness that was not dependent on his vicissitude of life. We do not need more knowledge, but more wisdom. Wisdom comes from our own attention. Meanwhile, the news that Siddhartha had set out on a spiritual road had reached the Brahmin Kundana, the one who had originally predicted such a career for the prince, and he set out to join him. Kundana lived with 4 other seekers of truth: Badiya, Vipa, Mahamana, and Asaji, and they went along with him. All 6 therefore, clad in the orange robe of the ascetic tie, wander around as a group. The usual procedure then and now for anyone seeking spiritual enlightenment was to look for a teacher, a guru. Despite the strict ordering of society according to caste and the numerous and detailed obligation that this entail for every member of that society according to the status. The usual business of gaining and imparting religious knowledge was largely left to individual intuitive. There were no officially recognized institute of learning, not even a clear hierarchy of religious authorities, such as, for instance, in major Christian denomination process for spiritual guidance, it was for spiritual For spiritual guidance, it was necessary to attach oneself to a teacher, as ascetic who, by virtue of the experience and wisdom attributed to him, had begun to attract and accept pupil. The authority of such teacher depends solely on their reputation. There were so many such teachers in India at that time, and some of them with large followings. Often a teacher would be known for his attendance to a particular aspects of religious disciplines or for a particular doctrine, so that he and his groups of pupils became an identifiable school, even perhaps a sect. It was up to the novice himself to decide to whom he would become attached. In accordance with this practice, the first major step taken by Gautama and his companion was to choose a guru. One of the most celebrated teachers is that part of India at that time was Alara Kalama, whose system was devoted to achieving the level of meditation that, such in the adequacy of language, is described in the text merely as the stage of nothingness. It was under Alara that Gautama and his companions first enrolled. Gautama studied especially hard. Indeed, he had made such progress that one day Alara announced he could teach him no more. "You are now equal to me," he told Gautama. "Will you stay here and help me teach my pupils?" But Gautama was not satisfied. "Is that all you can teach me?" he replied. "Can you not teach me how to escape from death, illness, and old age?" "No," said Alara. "I cannot teach you something I do not know myself. No one in this world knows that." So Gautama and his friends left. As they wandered around in the country, they passed on to others that they have learned under Alara. But meanwhile, they look about for a teacher who could take them further. In due course, they came across another renowned teacher, Adaka Ramaputta, who headed a school dedicated to cultivating an advanced form of mental concentration. term, again, rather unhelpfully for the uninitiated. Neither perception nor non-perception. This was something that had reputedly been achieved by the founder of this school, Rama, but even Yugada himself, to whom Rama had relinquished charge of his pupil before he died, was still striving towards that goal. Under Adgada supervision, Gautama was successful, whereupon Adaga, with due humility, invited him to become the leader of the school. But again, Gautama felt unsatisfied and once more departed to continue his search. The little party eventually arrived at the place called Uruvira, and here they decided to settle for a while. It was a good spot for their purpose, a tranquil wooded area with a river at hand to provide water and a village nearby where they could beg for their food. They set up a hermitage and resolved to try to teach their own way, unaided by any teacher, to their spiritual goals. Modification of the body had been practiced by many. Mortification of the body had been practiced by many people in many places as a spiritual discipline, and it was the procedure that Gautama, along with his companion, now decided to follow. He began by eating less. At first, he restricted himself to 1 meal a day, and gradually it became a meal every 2 days, then every 3 days. He no longer begged but fed himself on a root diet of fruits, roots, and the leaves of certain plants. His once healthy, robust body became emaciated. His skins became dry and wrinkled, and his eyes sunken into their socket until, as the text graphically put it, he resembled stones in a deep well. He began to suffer terrible pain and hunger. But his self-torture did not end there. He punished his body by holding his breath for long periods, until his head would seem about to burst. In the hottest season, he would stay out in the burning sun during the day, and indoor, where the air oppressingly stuffy at night. In winter, he would bathe in icy water. To demonstrate his contempt for his body, he took to wearing a filthiest rag salvaged from a rubbish heap or even from corpse awaiting cremation. He also put his mental endurance to the test. On the night of the new moon and full moon, as awesome times where supernatural beings were abroad, he would go and sit alone in the mortuary ground. Nor did the more obvious threat from marauding wild animals in such place scared him away, and all the while he practiced meditation, though to little available. For 6 years, Gautama underwent this regime before he decided it was leading him nowhere. Then one day he collapsed. He was found by a shepherd who gave him milk and took him into his care. He did not leave the shepherd until he regained some of his old health and robustness. And then he went to rejoin his 5 companions. They, meanwhile, were continuing practice their austerities, and when they saw that Gautama was no longer doing so, they were shocked and upset. In fact, they were so disgusted at what must have seemed to them a failure of discipline. If not actually a betrayer of the undertaking. They jointly agreed that they would have no more to do with him. They got up and departed, leaving him behind. But Gautama, now left to himself, went on building up his strength until, it is said, his body regained its original golden hue, and 32 physical features indicating that he was destined to become a Buddha were once more clearly visible. There lived in the neighborhood at that time a woman called Sujata. That's what the text says. Sujata, a daughter of a wealthy property owner. Sujata was expecting a baby, and she had vowed that if a son was born to her, she would make a special food offering to the deity of a nearby banyan tree. The banyan tree, with its characteristic aerial root that grows onto trunks and thus enable the tree to spread and renew itself, has long been regarded with particular reverence in India, and must have been from quite an early stage the focus of animist cults. Sujata duly bore a son and set about 2 elaborate rituals of preparing a fit meal for a god. First, she milked 100 cows and feed the cows this milk to 50 of them, and then feed the milk of this 50 cows to 25 of them, and so on went with this process of picture of the Buddha. And went on with the process of concentration known as working in the milk, until she was left with the milk of only 8 cows. With this rich and highly nutritious meal, she made a rice preparation using a special cooking vessel and taking care that it is not a drop was allowed to boil over or to go to waste. Finally, she emptied the preparation into the golden bowl, filling it to the brim, and then sent her maids to the banyan tree to make arrangements. Meanwhile, Gautama had chanced upon the banyan tree and had sat under the tree under it to meditate. When the maid approached, she was astonished to see this golden-hued figure, radiant, a kind of luster, sitting motionless at the foot of the tree. She rushed back to her mistress to announce excitedly that the deity himself had appeared in order to accept the offering. Sujata duly came hurriedly with her bowl of milk rice, appropriately draped with a fine silken covering, and was likewise struck by the seated figure glowing golden in the morning sun. Less courteous than her maid, perhaps, but overcome with awe, Sujata made her offering to Gautama, addressing him as follows: Venerable Sir, whoever you may be, human or God, please accept this milk rice, and may you achieve the goal to which you aspire. Sujata then placed the offering in Gautama's hand, salute him reverently, and withdraw, giving no thoughts to the previous bowl she had left for him. The time had indeed come for Gautama to achieve what he had been seeking for so many years, and the event of that day, as described in the text, is imbued not only by symbolic meaning, but with peculiar calm and dignity. Taking the offering, he went to the nearby river, Narendra, and putting the bowl on the bank, he re-entered the water to bathe himself. He then returned to the bank, sat down with the bowl in his lap, and began his last meal as an aspirant to Buddhahood. The meal over, he washed his hand and the bowl and placed the bowl on the water to float. Then he said, "If today I am to attain full enlightenment, may this golden bowl swim upstream." The bowl immediately did so. Gautama spent the rest of the day relaxing in the woodland along the river bank. In the evening, Gautama got up and made his way to the Bodhi tree. The figure's religious gorsa, another tree sacred in India and known as the tree of enlightenment. When he had chosen as the place for his great act of meditation, on the way he met the grass cutter Sutiya, who gave him some bundle of kosa grass. This grass was regarded as sacred and was used by Brahmin for sitting on. Gautama spread this grass on the foot of the Bodhi tree, turned to face the east, and sat down in a meditative posture. Thus he began the great trance from which he was to emerge on the full moon of the month of Visakha as a fully enlightened one, a Buddha. That's very interesting. The course of hold on. Fall asleep. Oh my God. My foot fall asleep. Sorry, guys. Oh, wow. Okay. The course of Gautama's meditation is elaborately recounted in the ancient texts. At an early stage, he was confronted by worldly temptation in a form of demons, an episode remarkably similar to the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. He then moved through various stages of spiritual ecstasy, call to mind all his previous forms of existence, and ponder how things come into being and disappeared. With his mind purified, he then considered the nature of defilement, how he is, how it is caused then, and how it can be destroyed. In so doing, he shedded from his mind the various forms of defilement, the defilement of sensual desires, of the wish for continued existence, of delusions, and finally achieved the deliverance that he had sought for so long. Now the cycle of birth is ended for me, he said afterward when talking about his experience. For me, this world no longer matters. According to one accord, Gautama spent 7 days in this trance, emerging as the sun was rising and the full moon of Visakha was setting. Then he spent further periods of time in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree, gazing at it with gratitude of having sheltered him and walking up and down in front of it. Many other events laden with symbolic significance are said to have taken place during this period. Soon after Gautama attained enlightenment, two merchants, Ta- Ta- Tapuso and Boraka, came by. Seeing Gautama seated under the Bodhi tree, they prepared a meal for him of flour and honey and offered it to him. After eating the food, the Buddha talked to them about his experience, and the two merchants become the first lay disciple, the first Buddhists. Gautama were now aged 35. The middle path. Okay. The Buddha were now ready to begin his mission, and he asked himself to whom he should first expound the doctrine, who would mostly quickly understand. His mind turned to his former teacher, Alara Kalama, a learned and wise man already far in advance in process towards spiritual protection. Alas, he has died. Then he thought of Udaga, the disciple of Brahma, but he too was dead. Finally, he remembered the 5 companions with whom he had shared a rigorous asceticism before breaking ways to seek enlightenment alone. They were still at the deer park in Isapatana near Baranes, Baranes, around 100 miles away. So he set out to make the long journey. After many days of traveling on foot, of course, he arrived one evening at the deer park, surprised no doubt to see him approaching. The 5 had not forgotten the scorn and resentment they had felt on parting from him. So, as he walked towards them, they remarked sarcastic to one another, "Look, here comes that so-called ascetic Gautama, the luxury-loving fellow who could not keep up a life of austerity and fell back into ease and comfort. Let's ignore him. Don't show him any respect or offer to take his bowl or his spare robe from him. Let him come and sit if he wants to, but he's not worth bothering about. As the Buddha came closer, however, they began to see that he had somehow changed. He had a majestic, authoritative air about him, such as they have never seen before. And without their realizing it, their his hospitality evaporated. Hostility evaporated. Soon they were going towards to greet him, and while one respectfully took his bowl and robe, another prepared for him to sit, and third hurrying off to fetch water to wash his feet. That evening he delivered his first sermon. It is known as the turning of the wheel of truth, and it is an occasion that holds an important place in Buddhism lore. The first to grasp the full significance of the Buddha's message was Kundana, who had originally predicted Siddhartha's enlightenment. And as he did so, the Buddha exclaimed, Kundana had realized it. Kundana had realized it. The full expositions of the doctrine, however, evidently lasted well beyond that evening, for the Buddhas later describe how two of the monks would go out begging while he instructed the other three, and vice versa, until all had fully absorbed his teaching. This is perhaps an appropriate place to set out the main elements of his teaching. In its classical form, the Buddha's doctrine is expressed in dry, methodical, almost mechanical terms. Each aspect is neatly subdivided and categorized in such a way that it might have been laid out as a chart. And that is indeed that it is meant to be. At a time when there was little literature, much learning was transmitted orally from teacher to pupil in a way that was easy to recognize, to memorize. Thus, we have as the core of Buddhism doctrine the Eight Noble Path, the hold on, doctrine, the Noble Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, the five groups of clinging, and so on. They are a convenient way of organizing complex and abstract concepts into framework that is not easily memorized, but ensure the transmission and preservation intact of the essential features of the teacher. And these are the terms in which Buddha addressed the five who were to be the first disciple of Buddhism. The basis of Buddha's philosophy is the Four Noble Truths. The first three of these were really stages of simple logical argument that parallels the Buddha's own early progress from the comfortable life of a prince to the search of enlightenment. The argument goes on as follows. 1. Life is full of suffering, a veil of tear, because of illness, aging, discontent, and the awareness of death. The course in this suffering is desire, or attachment to the world in such a way as to become liberal to suffering. Desire for sensual pleasures, desire to see an end to an unpleasantness, desire to go on living, etc. Therefore, the way to eliminate suffering is to eliminate desire. The Four Noble Truths reveals the way to achieve this removal of desire. That way is the central part of the Buddhism's discipline. The Noble Eightfold Path, or the middle path, explaining this, the Buddha told his 5 disciples, there are 2 extremes that must be avoided by a man who renounced the world. One of this is the practice of those things related to the passion, particularly sensuality. This is low, uncivilized, unworthy, and unprofitable, and is fit only for the worldly mind. The other extreme is the practice of self-mortification, which is painful, undignified, and equally unprofitable. Both of those extremes, of course, were familiar to the Buddha. The sensual life was the one who had followed. The sensual life was the one he had followed as a young man, while it was his abandonment of rigorous eccentricism that had so offended those who were now listening to him. He rejected the former because it retarded one's spirit progress, and the latter because it weakens one's intellect. The alternative was the Noble Eightfold Path, a form of conduct that avoid both self-indulgence and self-mortification. The 8 requirements of this discipline were generally labeled as follows: right understanding, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. They require a little explanation. Right understanding means seeing life as it is, revealing the nature of existence as summed up in the 4 Noble Truths. This is subdivided into 20 items representing various aspects of this understanding. Second, right thought means a pure mind, the avoid of feeling that obstruct progress to perfection, such as lust, malice, and cruelty. Right thought is closely linked to right understanding, right effort, and right mindfulness. 3. Right speech means cultivating the right characteristic of one's word as in one's thought. One should refrain from telling lies, backbiting, idle gossip, and the likes, and address people in a kindly and tolerant manner. Correct speech should not be loud, excited, or opinionated. It should also avoid inflaming the passion of others, as may happen when addressing crowds in an open air. So right speech may not be easily achieved by politicians or demagogues. the Margaret. Four, right action is broken down into 5 precepts, each covering negative and positive behaviors. The first of these 5 commandments prohibits killing and urge charities and kindness to all living things. The other precept deals with thieves and generosity, sensuality, sincerity, and honesty, and the use of intoxicating drinks or drugs. Among these, 2 tend to stress particularly abstaining from taking life and from sensual indulgence. But all 5 injunctions are important for the discipline aspiring to higher things. Right action is also allied to other steps on the Eightfold Path, notably right understanding, right effort, and right mindfulness. Right livelihood is straightforward. In earning your living, you should not engage in any business or activities that conflicts with or compromise the conduct of life according to the Buddha. It follows that any kind of deceit or exploitation, anything that causes harm or injustice to others is to be avoided. 5 forms of trade in particular are prohibited. There are trades in arms, in living things, in flesh, intoxicating drinks, and in poison. But the occupations of soldiers, hunters, and fishermen are also excluded, and are usuries, prostitutions, and soothsayer. One has to live, of course, but since the Buddhist ideal is a life of homelessness and freedom from material attachment, one need should be simple as possible. Even when there are families and business responsibilities. With right livelihood are associated right understanding, right effort, and right mindfulness. Right effort consists of fostering noble quality and rejecting ignoble ones. It is divided into 4 parts: constructing immoral, constructing a moral training, by which the other obligations of the Eightfold Path can be fulfilled. By practicing this training, the Buddhas will achieve what are known as the 10 perfections: generosity, moral integrity, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, honesty, determination, loving, kindness, and equanimity. Right mindfulness is the development of intellectual awareness in the service of spiritual progress. Here, one is getting into a deeper level of Buddhist philosophy. But in simple terms, this means training one's mind to examine things in such a way as to recognize what is important and not to lay astray. It might be described as a kind of spiritual intuition. 4 areas of experience are categorized from examination, one's own body, one's feeling, one's mind, and the idea that arrive in one's mind. With proper regards to this 4 fundamental of mindfulness, one perfects the 7 factor of enlightenment translates inadequately as mindfulness, investigation of the Dharma, the essential teaching of the Buddha, energy, rapture, tranquility, meditative concentration, and equanimity. Right concentration is the first step of the path. The practice of meditation that led to the full understanding of the impermanence of things and eventually to nirvana. Meditation requires discipline and training like other activity. Steady, gentle breathing is recommended while the mind tries to concentrate on tranquility. Whenever vagrant thoughts creep in, they should be patiently expelled, and in the early stage at least device like counting and repeating formula can be employed to assist concentration. There are also 5 mental hindrances that helps to be removed or at least weakened before meditation can begin. These are sensuality, ill will, laziness, worry, and skepticism. The Buddha explained much else besides to his 5 companions. For instance, he went into the doctrine of no soul, an idea that, at least on the face of it, conflicts with many other religions can rise the questions of whether Buddhism can strictly be called a religion at all. But the essential are in the Noble Eightfold Path, and we shall see later. The Buddha himself did not favor philosophic arguments for its own sake. To meditate is to listen with a receptive heart. Okay, we'll start with community much later. So I'm testing out my mic here, guys. I don't know who's still on. Did some of you fall asleep on me yet? Or some of you still here? Okay. Well, either way, I'm testing out the mic. Hopefully that sounds okay for everybody. Okay เป็นยังไงเสียงไมค์ใหม่สิไปแข่งไมค์ทองคำใดบ่นี่นะฮะ Okay, well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Bye bye, bye bye, chup chup.